Imagine that one day no one will remember you. The truth that no one wants to hear. One day, no one will remember you. Not your name, not your face, not the things you built, the photos you took, or the words you shared. That's not a threat. It's not pessimism. It's just how time works. And if you're honest with yourself, that thought terrifies you, doesn't it? You've probably never said it out loud, but deep down, you've wondered, what's the point of everything I'm doing? Will anyone remember me when I'm gone? Is all of this effort, all of this noise, for nothing? That question sits quietly in the background of your life. When you chase success, when you work late nights, when you share a post, a picture, a thought, hoping, maybe this one will echo beyond today. We are terrified of being forgotten, not because we're afraid of death itself, but because we're afraid of being erased, of being invisible, of vanishing without a trace. It's why we build. Why do we hustle? Why do we document every moment? Why do we exhaust ourselves chasing legacy, a name carved in stone, a story passed down? But here's the truth no one wants to admit. The world forgets almost everything, and it always has. Think about it. Can you name your great-great-grandparents? Can you list the artists, dreamers, thinkers who lived 1,000 years ago, who loved and fought, and hoped just like you? Most of them are gone, not just from this world, but from memory itself. Time doesn't care how loudly you lived. It only moves forward. And that's terrifying, isn't it? To think that one day, everything you've built, every dream you've chased, every photo and video and caption you've shared, will disappear. We don't want to believe it, so we fill our lives with noise. Achievements, awards, likes, followers, anything that might echo a little longer. But let me ask you something most people never dare to ask. What if being forgotten isn't a curse but a blessing? What if it's not the end of your story, but the beginning of how you start living differently? Because buried inside the fear of erasure is a hidden key, one that could change how you see yourself, your life, and what matters. The fear no one talks about. We don't talk about it often. Not at dinner tables, not in classrooms, not even in late-night conversations with people we trust. But it's there, quietly shaping so many of the choices we make. The fear of being forgotten. It's not as dramatic as the fear of death. It's not as obvious as the fear of failure. It's something deeper, more subtle, the fear of erasure. And yet, this fear is everywhere. You can see it in the person who spends their entire life chasing accolades, stacking trophies, building an empire, hoping their name will live on long after they're gone. You can see it in the person who never stops posting, sharing, uploading, carefully curating their lives so that someone, somewhere, will remember them. You can see it in the way we obsess over follower counts, over digital footprints, over the idea of leaving a mark. We are terrified of being invisible, of living a life that doesn't echo, of building something that fades into nothing. And here's the craziest part. This fear is ancient. Long before social media, people built monuments, wrote books, painted masterpieces, led empires, not just to experience life, but to fight the slow erosion of time. It's why we carve names into marble. Why do we tell stories around fires? Why do we pass down family histories, even when the details blur over generations? Because we want to believe that if we build loudly enough, if we love hard enough, if we leave behind enough, someone will remember. But history proves otherwise. Entire empires have crumbled without a trace. Millions of lives, dreams, fears, and loves erased without a whisper. How many stories have you never heard because they weren't written down? How many voices have vanished because no one recorded them? The world is filled with forgotten people who once felt what you feel, who once worried if what they did would matter. And the truth is, it didn't matter to history. The fear we carry is not unique. It's the same fear that's been passed down for centuries, inherited without question. But here's the thing no one tells you. Chasing memory won't protect you from time. It never has. And in that truth, there's something quietly revolutionary, something that can set you free. My struggle with being forgotten. I wish I could tell you that I've always known this truth, that I've always lived free from the fear of being forgotten. But that would be a lie. For most of my life, that fear lived quietly in the background, shaping my choices without me even realizing it. I can remember the first time I really felt it. I was a teenager, walking home alone one night, looking up at the sky, and for whatever reason it hit me. This crushing awareness that one day I would die, and eventually no one would even know I existed. My name, my face, my thoughts, all of it would disappear like a footprint in the sand. And that realization shook me. It didn't make me afraid of dying. It made me afraid of being invisible, of living a life so ordinary that it vanished without leaving a trace. That fear followed me into adulthood. It's what pushed me to overwork, to say yes to every opportunity, to want my name attached to something, anything, that would last longer than I would. I would stay up late, chasing dreams I didn't even question, hustling to build things I wasn't sure I cared about, all because I wanted to leave a mark. Because if I could just make something big enough, loud enough, important enough, maybe I wouldn't disappear. But no matter how much I achieved, no matter how many people noticed, the fear never really left. Because deep down, I knew the truth. None of it would last. The more I chased legacy, the more exhausted I felt. Like I was running on a treadmill, trying to outrun the inevitable. And here's what I eventually realized. The fear of being forgotten isn't about the world. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about our worth. It's about believing that if no one remembers us, we never mattered. That lie ruled my life for years, until something shifted, something I'll share with you next. Because the moment I stopped running was the moment everything changed. The world forgets everything. The more I wrestled with this fear, the more I started to look outside of myself, to history, to the world. I wanted to know, was I the only one who felt this way? Had anyone ever actually succeeded in being remembered? What I found was sobering. Look back far enough, and you'll see something undeniable. The world forgets almost everything. It doesn't matter how powerful, talented, or revolutionary someone was, time eventually erases them. Entire empires have risen and fallen, their rulers' names now forgotten or misremembered. The world was once shaped by kings, queens, warriors, and poets whose names barely live on as trivia, if at all. Think about it. How many people lived and laughed and loved 1,000 years ago? Millions, maybe billions. How many of their names do you know? A handful, if any. History isn't a complete record. It's a spotlight, a selective, fragile thing. And the light only ever shines on a few. The rest, they vanish. But it's not just the past. Even in modern times, forgetting is happening faster than ever. Think of the celebrities, influencers, innovators who dominated headlines 5 years ago. How many of them are still talked about today? The digital age has given us the illusion of permanence. But scroll back far enough, and you'll realize how fast the internet forgets. The posts, the photos, the viral moments, the fame, it all fades. It's humbling to realize that the very thing so many of us chase, recognition, remembrance, leaving a mark, is built on sand. And if you zoom out even further, the perspective only gets more brutal. One day, even the monuments will crumble. Even the stories written in books will fade. Even the stars themselves will burn out. Everything disappears eventually. At first, this realization feels crushing, like nothing matters. But if you lean in closer past the fear, something unexpected emerges. If nothing lasts, then maybe meaning was never about memory. Maybe the weight we've given to being remembered was misplaced all along. And that realization cracked something open for me, a question I'd never dared to ask. What if I stopped chasing permanence? What if I stopped trying to outrun forgetting? That question changed everything. The moment I changed my mind. It didn't happen in a grand cinematic moment. There was no thunderbolt, no deep conversation, no life-altering event. The shift came quietly, like most important things do. I was sitting in my room late one night, scrolling mindlessly through old photos and videos, a digital archive of my own life, carefully curated and saved, like proof that I existed. And then I stopped on a photo I didn't even remember taking. It wasn't special. It wasn't a milestone. It was a blurry picture of me and a few friends, laughing over something dumb and forgettable. And here's the thing, I couldn't remember what we were laughing about. I couldn't remember the conversation. But looking at that photo, I knew exactly how I felt in that moment. Alive, connected. No one else would ever care about that photo. No one else would ever know the moment even happened. And yet, it mattered. Not because it was recorded, not because it would be remembered, but because it was real. That night, I sat with a question I'd never let myself ask. What if the most meaningful moments of my life were the ones no one would ever remember? What if my worth wasn't something I could store, archive, or prove? What if it was something I lived in tiny, fleeting moments that disappeared as quickly as they arrived? That question shattered something inside me, because for the first time, I realized I'd been looking in the wrong place all along. I'd spent so much time trying to build something that would outlast me, but the truth is, the only thing that ever mattered was how I lived in the moments I had. No one would remember that night. No one would remember that photo. But it was still real. And it was still enough. That realization didn't erase the fear overnight, but it planted a seed, one that would grow into something far more powerful than being remembered. What actually matters. Once that seed was planted, everything I thought I knew about meaning started to unravel. For years, I believed that what mattered was what lasted, that the goal was to build something big enough to outlive me. A legacy, a name, something people would talk about when I was gone. But the more I looked around, the more I realized the moments that shaped me the most were the ones no one else would ever remember. Think about it. The conversation that made you feel seen on a day when you felt invisible. The laugh you shared with a friend when nothing else seemed right. The time you sat with someone in silence, and it felt like the whole world paused. No one recorded those moments. They won't end up in history books. They won't trend online. But they were real, and they mattered. We've been taught to believe that meaning is measured by memory, that if no one remembers, it doesn't count. But the truth is the opposite. Meaning isn't something you leave behind. It's something you experience. It's in how you show up for the people around you. It's in the way you make someone feel seen, even if they forget your name. It's in the kindness you offer when no one's watching. It's in the love you give without expectation of legacy. When I started paying attention, I realized that my life was already filled with these moments. The quiet ones, the small ones, the forgettable ones, and they were enough. Because meaning doesn't require permanence, it requires presence. It's not about being remembered. It's about being here, right now. When you stop measuring your worth by what you leave behind, you start to see what was always in front of you. The beauty of now. The freedom of living without the weight of legacy. The chance to live a life that matters, not because it lasts forever, but because it's real today. That's what matters. You don't need to be remembered. So here's the truth, the one we spend our whole lives trying to avoid. One day, no one will remember you. Not your name, not your face, not the things you built, or the words you said. And that's not something to fear. That's something to free you. Because if nothing lasts, then everything matters. Not in history books, not in stone, but right now, in the way you show up, in the way you love, in the way you live. You don't need to build a legacy that echoes through time. You don't need to make sure your name lives on after you're gone. You are the mark. You are the moment. You are enough. Right here, right now. And the sooner you stop chasing remembrance, the sooner you'll start living. So don't waste another day trying to be unforgettable. Instead, live fully today. Love deeply today. Be kind, present, and real today. Because this moment, the one you're living right now, is all you've ever needed. And if this message spoke to you, if it lifted even a little weight off your shoulders, I want you to do one thing. Subscribe to this channel. Because here, we talk about the truths no one wants to say out loud. The ones that change how you see yourself and the world. And if you're ready to live without fear, to live fully, I'll be right here, reminding you every step of the way.